Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to talk more about SIDME's virtual coaching services today. We have our guest speaker, Amy Anders. I'm going to introduce her in just a moment, a little bit more in just a moment. Thanks for joining us. And we do encourage you to chat with us. TJ Hoffman, the Director of Customer Success and Marketing, is going to be manning the chat. So go ahead and let us know if you have questions for Amy today, and he will stop us occasionally to ask the questions and have Amy answer those questions. So welcome. The objective of today's webinar is, and the audience of today's webinar really is, it's intended for principals and school leaders who see the value in supporting teacher growth through coaching, but who aren't able to provide the systematic and structured support over a sustained period of time in order to help make a difference for new teachers or struggling teachers or teachers who want to grow from good to great. And maybe that's because you don't have instructional coaches in your building or your district, or you don't have a sufficient number of them in order to provide the coaching support that they most definitely need. Again, Amy Anders is our featured guest speaker today, and we're excited to have her with us. I'll be introducing her in just a moment. First, I want to introduce myself and talk a little bit about what virtual coaching is. Once I establish that context and background, then we'll begin asking Amy to share some of her advice and expertise and wisdom with us. So my name is Allison Burnett, and almost 40 years in public education in the great state of Texas. I am currently the Director of Virtual Learning for SIDME and an adjunct professor in an urban education department of a local university. Excited to facilitate today's webinar. And I want to begin by talking about the problem that we have worked to solve at SIDME with our virtual coaching services. And the problem is really demonstrated here for us on this slide, where we're showing the research of Robert Marzano, which is available in his Classroom Management That Works book. But to say that, we're looking here at the disparity, the difference in terms of student achievement outcomes when a student has the benefit of having a highly effective teacher versus what would be deemed to be perhaps least effective teacher. And the difference in terms of student achievement is measurable, almost 40% difference in terms of student achievement based on the effectiveness of the teacher. And if we look at that gold bar, that 6% bar, we know that a student increases their achievement just through maturation, not through even having any instruction at all. So there is some growth based on that. So this is the problem that faces us. We know that teacher effectiveness has a huge impact on student achievement, not just for the year that that teacher has that student, but there's a halo effect that can last up to 3 years after an effective teacher works with a student or a least effective teacher works with a student. We all want our children, our students to have the most effective teachers possible, and we know that it takes 3 to 5 years to grow those teachers into effectiveness in most cases. And we know that at 3 to 5 years, we also hit a different kind of wall, and that's the wall where we start to see a huge number of teachers leaving the profession just as they're hitting their stride. So we work, I think, hard as a profession to help grow our teachers. And one of the time-honored ways, one of the traditional ways of doing that is through professional development or professional learning. On the left-hand side of my screen, you see an example of that. This is actually a workshop that I was conducting. I worked for several years for a company, and I traveled all over the country, and I would do these sort of hotel conference room workshops. And on the left, you see an example. I think I'm in Chicago based on the heavy jackets that I see there folks wearing. And it's really kind of a sardine approach. How many people can we get into a room for 5.5 hours to listen to someone talk about strategies? And that's what we typically do. We believe in professional learning and professional development. I'm not going to knock that. I think it's a great, and I participated in it for many years as a presenter. But I will say the research tells us that we have a very poor return on investment when we use that kind of professional learning. And that is about 10% of the people in that room, according to research, Joyce and Showers, probably went back to their school and implemented any of the strategies that I talked about that day. And I was talking about some important strategies. I was talking about strategies for struggling readers. So I have no contact with these folks after they leave my my conference that day, and I don't know if they have questions about the strategies. I don't know if they tried to implement them. I don't know if they implemented them correctly. So we have this situation where we're trying to help teachers grow, but we're doing it perhaps in a rather ineffective way. So improvement begins with change. Thus is born the concept of virtual coaching. And you can see the contrast here. 50 or so folks in a room listening to a presenter versus a one-on-one conversation between a coach and a coachee, where a coachee is being very engaged, very attentive. It's a conversation for them and about them and supporting them. Very, very big difference. So how does virtual coaching work? And just the kind of the gist of this is that professional learning is evolving, and virtual coaching is one of, I think, one of the most promising ways of growing teachers, and contrasted with the professional development that model we're currently using. So in this virtual coaching model, we really have a hybrid approach. We in CIBME, we use the CIBME platform that allows teachers to film and upload their video onto a secure platform. And in that platform, their coach has the ability to view their video and provide time-stamped feedback. In addition to that, we have a Google Hangout conversation or Skype conversation, that personalized one-on-one conversation with our coachee, and we're focusing on very few goals, handoff goals from the administrator usually, and we're working on goals that matter, goals that will impact student achievement. That's the gist of it. Let me go into the ABCs of this just a little bit more before we bring Amy into the conversation. And so before virtual coaching begins, we are typically contacted here at CIBME by the supervisor who shares with us that they have a teacher who they'd like to have us coach. We ask for an information sheet that gives us a little bit of background on that teacher. And we ask the administrator or the supervisor to share with us 2 or 3 handoff goals that we'll start with. Our CIBME liaison then meets with the coachee, onboards them to the platform, makes sure they understand how to use the technology, and helps them to understand what the coaching process will look like. Then shares with me, our liaison shares with me the needs of that particular coachee. So typically it falls into 3 categories, 1 of 3 categories. Either it's a classroom management issue, which is the biggest goal, it's a content issue, or it's a pedagogy issue, just instruction. And we match our coach and coachee, and coaching begins. It's a 6-week cycle, and each week is really redundant or repetitive, beginning with a 45 to 55-minute conversation via Google Hangouts or Skype. We focus on and request 1 to 2, we call them snapshot videos. They're very short videos that are going to allow us to see the teacher teaching and working on the goals that we've been given by the supervisors. We're seeing them apply the strategies that we're sharing with them. We share some resource-based resources with them, and then we provide a weekly coaching report that keeps the supervisor and keeps me in the loop in terms of what's happening in that coaching conversation. Here I'm just sharing with you a quick screenshot of an example video that a teacher would share, an instructional video, and on the right-hand side you're seeing the coach providing that time-stamped feedback that's aligned to moments in time. And then we say that at CIBME, we make every moment a teachable moment because of the time-stamp feature of the feedback that we offer. So at CIBME, we believe in a continuous improvement cycle in our coaching model that begins through the identification of those goals, and the supervisor generally identifies 1 to 2 to 3 goals to share with us to get things started. We use video to help our coachee and help our coaches to see the current reality of the situation, and then our coaches provide new strategies to the coachee to try and use. We continue using video then to reflect on the effectiveness and the growth that we're seeing as those strategies are applied, and then we identify whether or not we have sufficient progress and growth to move on to new goals, or whether we're going to stay grounded in the goals as they exist. So that's enough in terms of the background of what CIBME does. And now I want to introduce our featured presenter, our featured speaker today, and that is Amy Anders. So Amy, let me just introduce you and have you to add on to anything that I say in my introduction, and then we'll get started with our chat with Amy. So Amy has over 30 years in public education. She's worked as a teacher and as a coach and as an administrator. She also, and this is how I got to know her, worked as a superintendent or chief administrator in a private school here in the Houston area. In addition to that, she's worked as a consultant for an ACP program. In addition to working as a consultant, she actually became an administrator or launched her own branch of that alternative certification program. So Amy has a plethora of experience in the world of education. Amy, do you want to add to anything I've said today?
Oh, you've covered it. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, very good. All right, so off we go then. We just want to have this chat, and we do want you to ask any questions along the way. Let me check in with TJ. TJ, do we have any questions so far?
I anxiously anticipate our first question.
Okay, very good. We'll anxiously sit by and hope for that as well. But meanwhile, let me start with a question for Amy. And Amy, as a former administrator, so I'm asking you to wear that hat for a moment, imagining yourself back in the building where you were the one of the administrators, and thinking about those new or struggling teachers in that building. Talk to us about how a school typically responds to a new or struggling teacher within a school setting.
Oh yes, that's a good question. And thank you for having me today. I've looked forward to it. As an administrator, and it differed over the time that I was an administrator in different schools. And different schools had different ways of dealing with those things. Many times when a new teacher comes in, they're given a mentor and someone to mentor them, which is usually another teacher. So of course, throughout the whole school year, people get tied up in their own teaching, and that becomes probably down on the list is the mentoring part of their job. But I know that new teachers or struggling teachers, when they're having difficulty, they try to go to that mentor and try to get some help from the mentor. Throughout that process, we're in the classroom. We see a teacher struggling. We may have a conversation, sit down with the mentor and the teacher and figure out and look at some short-term goals. What can we do? What is it? And where do we want to go? Long-term, if we see that the teacher is struggling to the point of, this could really affect their job, there is a growth plan that happens, and those are more specific, time-based timelines and those kinds of things. But what happens, and from my experience in schools, administrators get tied up in so many things, and that have nothing to do with being in the classroom, and mentors get tied up in their own teaching, in their own school year. So we do the best we can. We did the best we could do. But sometimes those things get they're not the top priority at that point, unfortunately. And then when you have many new teachers because of teacher turnover, then you're always trying to play catch up, trying to get people on board with what has already been established in the school. So long-term and short-term, getting teachers to look at what's going on right then in their classroom, but long-term growth plans, those kinds of things. But like I said, it's hard. I understand. I know it's hard to always be able to give your time to that kind of thing that needs a lot of time.
Sure. So one of the things that occurs to me here, Amy, is that, we really are very attentive, and I think we've gotten really good at trying to hire new teachers. I can remember being on several committees, interview committees. So we got in the districts where I was working, we would have a committee. Perhaps there would be the department chair from that department. If there were instructional coaches, they would be there. Of course, the administrator. Sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 people there to interview a teacher, really trying to make sure that we ask the right questions and we got a really good feel for that teacher. And so we're surprised when we go to all that effort, maybe spending as much as an hour talking to a teacher, sometimes even having them submit a video of themselves teaching. Some folks even brought portfolios of student work with them from their student teaching experiences. And so we go through all that effort and we're shocked and surprised and amazed when the school year starts and we're a few weeks in, the honeymoon's over, and we begin to hear the dreaded, there's too much noise in the classroom, the kids aren't in their seats, the teacher seems not to be able to take control of the classroom, and we're shocked by that because we try to be so thorough in hiring them. Did you have any experiences like that?
Oh, definitely. And you're right. You know, people, when you're in an interview, it's totally different than being in a classroom. You know, and you do the best you can. You get a feel for. You try to ask the right questions, scenarios. What would you do if? But being in a classroom, dealing with the personalities of many different people, and the dynamics of a class. So teachers have to be very adaptable. You know, they have to be able to pinpoint and change and adapt and communicate. Communication is very, you know, it's big. Communication with your fellow teachers and the parents, the students. So it's a whole dynamic that goes on. And so sometimes it doesn't click like that, like you think, you know, and every classroom is different.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The problem, I think, sometimes too is then we think that we've gone into all this, taken all this trouble and all this care in hiring folks. We don't anticipate that we're going to have our instructional coaches or the mentors even, or the administrators get too involved in helping them be successful in the classroom. It's just, I mean, I was an instructional specialist in a local district here, and it just wasn't on our radar. It wasn't on our radar to anticipate that a portion of my time was going to be spent working with a new or struggling teacher, or even a teacher who wanted to hone some skills, moving from good to great. And so we don't earmark somebody for that, even if their title is instructional specialist or instructional coach. They're typically working with departments more so than I think individual teachers. They're just not earmarked for that responsibility or that duty. And so I think schools do a good job of responding in a kind of a 911 way. We can send the emergency response down for a day or two, for an afternoon, to have a talk with the teacher. But in terms of long term, I don't think that we have the personnel identified to provide that kind of long-term coaching that a new or struggling teacher might need, especially if we don't recognize that they're struggling until the third or fourth week of school.
Right. True. And that's the beauty of the virtual coaching that I've experienced, because you get that one-on-one, you build a relationship with that. You are focused on with them and their goals. It's a collaborative, you know, process. And so, and those things build on each other. And so as you go through this coaching process, you really get to know the teacher. You really get to understand what's going on, you know, with them, especially when you build that trust and the relationship part of it.
Yeah, and let me ask you about that, Amy, because I think that's important. And so so you've worked as a virtual coach now with us for this school year. And of course, you've been an administrator and you've worked on campuses and done in-person coaching as well. But to ask you that idea of trust, and maybe there is no difference. Maybe there is no difference between the trust that a teacher has for an on-campus coach and the trust a teacher can build with a virtual coach. Although I think maybe there are some nuances of differences. Have you found that to be the case?
You know, I think when a person when your coach is in the school, there's a whole different dynamics than when your coach is outside the school in that position, because you feel inside the school, you know, there's a what do I want to say? There's a point where you know that you can only say, or you feel like you can only go to this point, you know, but with a coach who is your personal coach, I think you can get a little more in depth in where you don't want to seem like you don't know what you're doing, because you know what you're doing. So I think when it becomes in a school, you feel like it's a little more personal, and that you're being looked at in a different way. in a different way. We had great coaches who worked with teachers daily on certain aspects, but they could only give so much. They worked with a group of teachers, so 1 to 27. You can only do so much, like you said. But when you have a personal coach, I've had teachers, and I've seen this because as an administrator, I know that there's a point where a teacher feels like that's all I really want to share. But in the virtual coaching, what I've realized is they're sharing things that bother them, or that have a little more impact on their daily teaching. They share things that I wish, I want to be better with communicating with parents. So they say, what can I do to have a better communication with parents? Or they'll ask questions that don't particularly have to go directly to how do I get student engagement? How do I have better student engagement? So, and in virtual coaching, it builds on each coaching session. Sometimes in a school district with an instructional coach or administrator, it doesn't necessarily build that way in my experience, because you're not always in that classroom looking at those goals with a timeline, like you would, like we do. So,
I think that's a good point. I think one of the things for me that makes our virtual coaching program successful is the fact that we stay so focused on just a few goals.
Right.
And remembering my experiences in schools, especially when we didn't have a single person dedicated to working with that new or struggling teacher, it was really the principal or the supervisor looking around the office at about 3:00 to see who could go down and help that struggling teacher today. And
Right.
that might be a different person tomorrow,
Exactly.
because we don't have that one, so if you happen to be walking through the office and you're an instructional specialist in the building on Tuesday at 3, and there's a struggling teacher who's really needing to talk to somebody, or there was some event that occurred that day in the classroom that just cannot occur again.
Right.
The kids walked out, or the kids refused to sit down, or whatever it might have been. They're not necessarily seeing the same person every day. And so, Amy, just to your point, what I've found, unfortunately, was that by the end of the week, that teacher, and if you were the person who went in on a Friday at the end of a long week when other people had gone in earlier in the week, you saw a teacher who was this new teacher, struggling teacher, who was also frustrated.
Right.
Not just frustrated by the kids and perhaps their behavior or misbehavior and the teacher's inability to sort of corral that, but
Right.
frustrated by the number of pieces of advice they'd been given
Exactly.
throughout the week. So what's the value then in virtual coaching, where we really limit ourselves to 2 or 3 very, very focused goals versus maybe that in-person coach in the building, or multiple coaches in the building who maybe have given that teacher too much to work on?
Right. Exactly. And what I've seen in my experience with virtual coaching is, yes, we do focus on those goals. We look at when we're looking at the video, we look at those bright spots. We give reflective questions. We suggest ideas that go on, that dynamic at that moment. And then it's built upon, because in our conversation with the teacher, then we make a connection with what we saw, what they felt about what happened, and then we build on that. And it's a continuum. And the thing I love about it is that we start out focusing on some things to increase student engagement. But from that point, it goes to say, now we've got kids interacting with Cornell Notes, not just a student engagement activity. We've got something in the long term that has actually changed the dynamics in the classroom. And at the same time, it's given that teacher a rubric of something very, material to hold in their hands when they're having conversations with parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're showing parents just how their child is thinking. So all this goes into play, and it's built upon by this process. And so that's the beauty of it for me. Mm-hmm. It's just to see the things the dynamics that go on and the building and the continuum, and seeing a teacher really feel like they have grown in that area. That it's not a quick fix. It's not just to say, hey, I did it, okay, now it's truly, something that helps a teacher grow over time.
Mm-hmm. So, Amy, one of the things I hear you saying is the notion of things build upon one another. We have this starting point. Maybe we have this goal that the supervisor has identified. Maybe it's to increase student engagement. But what you're saying then is we're spending 6 weeks with this teacher. So over the course of that 6 weeks, then the teacher begins to open up. So we move from that supervisor handoff goal into the teacher beginning to say, and here's what I want to work on. And that because it's a 6 weeks process, there's a closeness. I've heard some of our coaches talk about the fact that there's really a lot of sadness around the last coaching session.
And I've had that experience with the teachers I've worked there. They're like, Amy, are we ever going to talk? I'm here. Talk, but yes, it is kind of it. You build a good relationship, and that's the biggest part of this whole thing is building relationships, and having a collaborative type situation where you're throwing ideas here and really seeing teachers take more ownership of what they want a coach to really focus and help them with. And that, that is a very good positive dynamics when it comes to helping people grow, and in the profession. After I got out of retired from education, I became a realtor. And I always tell this story. I hired a coach. A lot of people in business hire coaches that have been in business for a long time. Coaches have the time, the resources, the ability to find resources. Sometimes teachers don't have that time, and so we're here in this type of situation. We're here to provide resources. We have that time to work with the teacher. But I spend a lot of money on coaches on me because on my profession in real estate, because a coach really helped me grow. And the more I had that coach, the more I wanted that coach. I saw the value in it. And so glad I did it. I'm glad it was a great decision.
So, Amy, that comes back to something in yesterday when we were doing a little prep for today. We talked about this and you spoke about this, and that is the fact that there has to be, and TJ just shared some research with me in the last couple of days, and you said it best, there has to be some motivation on the part of the coachee. This doesn't really work as effectively when we have a supervisor who doesn't roll it out correctly with the coachee, basically, in a kind of a non-supportive way. You're going to do this. You're going to be virtually coached. The coachee has no motivation around it. They aren't enthusiastic about it. They feel like sometimes it's punitive or they're being punished. Have you experienced that? And what do you say to just expound on that a little bit, the importance of the coachee seeing value in this process?
Oh, that's absolutely true. And yes, I have. I think it is about how you roll it out. It's how it's presented, and where it's not presented in a way that people feel like they are singled out in a certain, or that kind of thing. I always think about my coaching experience with coaching athletics. I think, what if I had players who didn't want to be on the team? They're out there, and so how that's hard. It's a hard in dynamics. It's not going to work the way it should work. I always tell anybody who's reluctant with this process, but is that just trust the process. Trust the process. Don't feel like this is an evaluation. This is a collaborative process. Let's work together on this. I trust the process, and if you don't feel it, just go with it, and trust that as throughout this whole time, that you're going to eventually see the value in it by just, being a part of it, being in it.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things we talk with our coaches about is here's what we see in sort of a pattern that exists in our 6 weeks process. And you can tell me if this has been true for you too. But typically the first week, there's a lot of the coachee's tentative. They haven't built a sense of trust around this. And so it typically takes a week or two. And you mentioned it, the importance of that relationship. There has to be a sense of trust. I'm in this for your best interest.
Right.
We as coaches see ourselves as an advocate for that coachee. And I know that's how you see yourself as well. I'm here to help you and to be your biggest cheerleader. So it takes about 2 weeks in most cases to have that sense of trust begin to be built. And for us also as a coach to get a sense of the reality of what's really happening through not only the teacher talking with us, but through the videos that we ask the teachers to submit to us. And then in my experience, and again, I'm interested in hearing yours, but that third week becomes magical. And so weeks 3, 4, 5, and 6, it's on the pedals to the metal, and the trust has been established, and they become almost like a sponge. So has that been your experience?
Yes, exactly. And it's so cute because the kids in the classroom also, and they look they know they're being somehow. Sometimes they know they're being videoed, and but they. The teacher is like, oh wow, let's do this. We're looking at maybe implementing something, and let's try it. Let's do this, class, and let's really, and they're, I'm going to tell you, the kids, I've really enjoyed watching the kids in the classroom too. I miss it, of course, and so, but getting that experience also, I remember a teacher. She said sometimes they come in real energetic from a program or whatever they're doing that day or another class. And she said, it's hard to get them back in line, get them back. They're so energetic. They have so much energy. And I said, hey, why don't try doing an activity, a physical activity, little physical activity in the classroom, but using your objective, using your objective for that moment. And she did. And so the kids loved it, and they were able to do their math and do a little physical activity. And I'm going to tell you that feeling of watching the teacher's face at that moment say, wow, just that little bitty thing made a huge difference in how she felt about kids coming back to the class, being very energetic, and how the kids felt. And so that little tip right there. And I have a feeling she's doing it now, doing these things. I just know she felt good about it. Mm-hmm. And so we celebrated that moment, and it was a good moment.
That's great, Amy. And that's just a great example of how, and I think this all the time is, just because we've tried everything that we know doesn't mean that we've tried everything. And that's the value of having a great, highly experienced coach like yourself, because you know that sometimes it's the littlest change that can have the biggest impact. Look at how simple that was. Yet you've turned this moment that was probably a huge frustration to her. Imagine that that was the time of day she dreaded every day. Yes. And the kids pick up on that too, right? And sometimes that even fuels their energy even more. But that simple suggestion, and it wasn't just, hey, try this, but it's you then holding her in a sense a little bit accountable. I think that we lose sight of the importance of accountability sometimes in our virtual coaching services. One of the things we do through the use of our video is we do hold people accountable. I do expect for you to try this. You've agreed that this would be a good thing to do. This is a perfect time to try it. We've talked it through. Maybe you've modeled it or I've modeled it for you. I'm sure you're going to do it correctly. Let me see the tapes. Let's go to the tapes and let's see how that's working. And we've held that teacher accountable. And then you said something else that I think is incredibly important, and that is there's a celebration. I think that when teachers get started with virtual coaching, or anybody who's going to be using video for coaching, I think there's the feeling that people are sort of out to get me. They're going to use that video to find everything that I'm doing incorrectly. And I think we have, as coaches, and one of the things about all of our coaches is they're positive, and they're cheerleaders. And if they don't strike me as that, if they don't strike me as that, they're not going to be effective. They have to be able to build a relationship. They have to be able to be a cheerleader and celebrate the growth and the changes and the work that the teachers are doing. And we are asking them to do a lot of work. So I applaud you, and it's exciting to hear that celebration. How often do we in schools where we're working in what we call our own silos, right? We're in our own perhaps islands of excellence, or we're in our own islands of despair. We're in that classroom, the door is shut. Others aren't seeing us. Nobody is helping us to celebrate our victories. And so it's great that you were there to help her do that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been very good for me. It's been a great opportunity for me. I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to work with teachers in this way, and my experience has been it's been beyond my expectations. So
great.
Thank you.
So let's check in with TJ. TJ, do we have any questions in the chat so far?
No, I'm waiting for Teresa. I'm going to start calling people out by name. My old cold calling techniques.
You must be a fan of Doug Lemov. You go, TJ, you go. We're going to keep going, though, because there's more ground to cover. And one thing that you've mentioned, Amy, and that I want to talk about a little bit is, so here we are, we're doing this work virtually. And sometimes when I'm talking to a supervisor, they'll say to us, well, I don't know how you can be effective, you're never in the classroom with this teacher. You never physically meet them. You might be hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from them. I'm just not sure I see how this can work. And one of the reasons I think that it does work, well, there's several reasons, but one of the reasons it does work is because we have this video platform, because the teacher can pull out their smartphone and, using the password protected SIVME app, record this short snapshot video, and then load it to the platform for the coach to provide feedback and that timestamp feedback. So video, and you've mentioned it, video has been an important factor in what you see as the success of your work with virtual coaching. Did you see in schools, did you see the use of video? And I know it's been a minute since you retired, not too many minutes, not as many minutes as perhaps me, but it's been a minute. Did you see coaches, instructional coaches or mentors using video, or teachers using video to be self-reflective whenever you were in a building?
Not too much. It was basically people going into the classroom, observing at that moment, and then leaving the classroom. I have suggested that teachers videotape themselves and go back. The reason why is just my coaching experience as far as coaching athletics. I know, I remember Saturday mornings going and meeting and getting video, whether it was a playoff video and I worked in football and basketball. So, I'd get the video, bring it back, we'd sit down and we'd break down the video. And so I know the importance of being able to look, stop, make comments, make notes, move on, and look at how important the use of video is. That's why I was so excited about this platform, because it is a process of building relationships, communication, collaboration, video, breaking it down, being able to go back, being able to make comments and timestamp those, and then and looking at those bright spots, looking at some ways where the ideas can be put into the process, and then also giving reflective questions, because reflective questions are those things that are going to carry on in our heads long after our coaching sessions have gone, ended. So the question, did I see a lot of videos? No, but I have encouraged teachers to videotape themselves and go back and look at it and reflect on it. But,
absolutely.
This is the platform that has the process, the process of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing about the platform is it does allow for that coachee to reply to your comments. So it's not one-way feedback.
Right.
the value is, I think, that the coachee can certainly view the video and be self-reflective. They can submit that video to their coach with their reflective comments. So the coach knows that the coachee has spent some time being self-reflective, looking at that video first, and then the coach can add comments, and the coachee can reply to those comments. So there's a couple of times within a video, maybe in a short video, there's only one moment that requires that back and forth in a sense. But when we ask that reflective question, wanting that coachee to really answer it, right? And we have that opportunity within the platform for that to happen. And I think that self-reflection, I think that we as a profession are very self-reflective. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for us to ask, especially in our virtual coaching process, it's a natural. And in our profession in general, I don't think that video is being used enough in order for that reflection to happen. Right. And I think part of the problem of that is that what we end up doing is, as the mentor who's going in that room, or as the instructional coach, or as the administrator who's going in that room, what we end up doing is having a conversation, asking that teacher to sit down beside us and having a conversation and I don't know if it was like this for you, but for me, the conversation began with, let's talk about, and I would have my little notepad, let's talk about what we just saw. And I would try to begin with the positives, and then I would look at my notepad and I'd say, do you remember when you were introducing the concept of foreshadowing and a student asked this question? And the teacher frequently would look at me and say, I don't remember that. I don't remember that happening, or I don't remember. And they're being honest. They don't remember because they were nervous because I was in the room. So I spent a lot of time just describing for them what happened, what took place, what I saw happening, so that very little of the conversation would be actually coaching. And I think sometimes the coachee that I was mentoring would be kind of skeptical, lack of belief, and that they really said that or they really did that. Right. So I love the use of video because it's totally objective. It's not my perception and telling you what I think you said when you were introducing foreshadowing, or the look that you gave that student who didn't know the answer. It's, as you said with athletics, it's going to the tape. Let's look at the objective evidence. And now I'm asking you as the teacher to be reflective. And 90% of the time they see it immediately. And they know it immediately in a way that they know it more deeply than if I had to describe it or explain it to them. So I think that's the value.
Very much so.
So let's continue. Amy, I have a few more questions for you, and then we'll start to wrap up. Yes, TJ.
My cold calling worked. So Teresa says, as I listen, I'm more convinced that we should have a Skype-type conferencing within the Sydney platform. So she says that they supervise student teachers as much as 80 to 100 miles away, and video conferencing in real time would be very helpful. So I guess the question is, is there how is it best to sort of facilitate between reviewing video within the Sydney platform, but then also having those live face-to-face conversations outside of the platform, since at least right now, you can't have those live conversations inside Sydney.
Sure. So Amy, do you want to take that, or you want me to take that?
Go right ahead. I mean, you know more about that type of the platform.
Okay. Sure. Sure. So to answer Teresa's question, and TJ, thank you for encouraging her to ask that question. To answer that question it's really how we do virtual coaching. It's the blended model. So we do ask for the teacher to submit the videotape, we call it a snapshot video, because it's really short in nature. We've learned that the longer the video that we ask the teacher to record, the more nervous they are, first of all. And secondly, the more likely we are to stray away from one of our core values, and that is to stay focused on the goal. So we've been given 2 or 3 handoff goals by the supervisor. If we have a teacher submitting a 45-minute video, we tend to ramble away a little bit from the focus on the goals. It's the attentiveness to the goals that we're focusing on, I think, that make us successful. So That's one of the things we would encourage folks to do. Keep it short, keep it focused on the goals that we're working on. That's what we're requesting the teachers to record. And so then the coach is providing that timestamp feedback, usually within 24 hours of receiving that video. So there's touch point one. We've got the video, we're providing timestamp feedback on that video within 24, sometimes 48 hours. We know that feedback is most meaningful when it's immediate and it's specific. So there's touch point one, focusing specifically on what we're seeing happening in the reality of that video. And then touch point two is we have that weekly coaching conversation, whether it's through Skype or Google Hangouts, that one-on-one conversation that sometimes does include an extension of what we saw in the video, but sometimes then can go beyond the video to say, and as Amy mentioned, let me share with you a strategy that I think would help you when your students are coming back from lunch and they're being very enthusiastic and they're having trouble transitioning in from play mode into instruction mode. Let me share with you a strategy that I think you could use, and then taking that Google Hangout time and that Skype time to explain the strategy, maybe to model that strategy. And as Amy said, it's very conversational. I'm not going to insist that the coachee use the strategy that they absolutely are opposed to using. I'm going to, in a sense, sell it to them. I'm going to explain it to them. If they say, that's just not me, I just don't want to do that, then here's another strategy. Let's try this. So I've shared with you 2 or 3 strategies. Which of those do you think would fit best into the situation and fit best into your teaching style? And then their assignment is to use that strategy and to record themselves, and that becomes the fuel for the next video conversation. So it really is a blended model. We call it a hybrid model of that. The coaching conversation is as important as the videotape is, and together it's really a powerful combination. So Amy, do you want to add anything to that? And TJ, do you think we answered that question well enough? Or if you'd like to add on, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think, I mean, the way that the platform is set, the whole platform is set up, it's exactly what you said, is that it builds on, the conversations build. And what I realized is when I'm having that conversation with the meeting, what we call the meeting, the chat, is that we're looking at what happened. Yes, we're talking about the things that went on and the things that were mentioned in the video that we talked about, or that we put in as far as our comments in the video. And then we look at, okay, so where are we going to, now how do we build on this? And so, and where do we go here? And so this is, and then they'll say, you know, when this happened, I didn't realize that, but when you put that at that particular moment, that timestamp is so important, because at that moment, then the teacher can go back and say, I went back and looked at that. I went back and looked at that, and then and then they're coming up with suggestions. You know what? I want to try this. And so, and do you have any resources? We have resources, you know, and so when they're asking for resources, that's a beautiful thing because, you know, they're in, and it's a good feeling, because that's what we are here for, you know, and so, yeah. And so I think that meeting, that Skype, that meeting talk is very important, because number one, you're building on your relationship, the communication's there. You get to, you know, humor, you know, we talk about, you know, we have that humorous, story or two, and they're like, oh, after the video, this is what happened, I just want to share. And so, you know, that's when you're building those relationships, and you're excited, you know, and so very important. Those things are very important.
And you said something, Amy, I think is really important to add to a little bit, and that is that, you know, sometimes this coaching relationship is all about increasing awareness. And what happens, and it's great, and you mentioned it happening, is we don't, as the coach, have to be the problem solver all the time. What I want is kind of that gradual release model. I want to show that coachee that problems can be solved, that there are resources that are out there, and that that you don't have to accept what is in the situation, that we can improve that. But I also want them to know that I'm not the only problem solver in this conversation. And so I loved it when you said, and really it's through that self-awareness, maybe that the coachee is focused on what that problem is. We've put a spotlight on that moment in time to say, okay, here's where the problem begins. That teacher being aware enough to say, it's when they come back from lunch, Amy. That's when that's when it really gets bad. And so they've put that spotlight on that moment in time. They've identified that that's the issue. And then we don't have to be the problem solver. We just have to be the facilitator as they think through and maybe make some suggestions and share a few resources and help them to understand that this does not have to be the way it is. There are other ways of handling this. They're 8 or 9 or 10, and we're the adults in the room, and we can figure this out together. So I love that you said that. TJ, do you have anything to add? Do you think we did a good job answering Teresa's question?
Not only do I think that you did a great job, Teresa thinks you did a great job. So
that's wonderful. Do you have anything to add, TJ?
How could I in any way
improve
upon what you already said?
All right. Thank you, TJ. So if we have no further questions, I do have a few more things that I'd like Amy to reflect on before we call it a day today. And so, Amy, here's one of my biggest concerns in our profession, and that is the idea, and I don't know where it comes from exactly, but I think that teachers who've been teaching for a while, let's say in their 4th and 5th and 6th year, they've been teaching for a while, and when a supervisor says to them, I'd like for you to try this virtual coaching. I'd like for you to give that a shot. And the teacher's response is, I'm an experienced teacher. I know what I'm doing. I don't need coaching. And that just is hard for me to listen to, because I can tell you that it was in my 19th year in teaching that I think I made my greatest growth. And so for me, hearing somebody who's relatively young in our profession having the attitude that they don't need coaching is hard for me to hear. What is your response to that idea of, I've been doing this a while and I don't really need to improve?
Yeah. Well, and I always go back to other professions. I want my doctor to grow. I mean, I want my doctor to be improving. I want, and I want people to be, in the know of what's, but more so than that, I think what happens is that we have to be, we've all, I think most of us have heard of professional learning communities, where it's not that you walk into your room and you become isolated, but that this is, if this is ongoing in your school, this is the climate, this is how the environment is, then we're all growing, we're all growing. That's the message. And sometimes I'm going to do this to grow, and we're going to do this, and so just knowing that is the expectation, is that we're all growing, and we're going to grow, whether it be this way or this way or this way. Let's find what works for us. And I think that's something that it's a climate thing. It's a school expectation. Mm-hmm. And so when that's the expectation, that we're all going to grow. I mean, I wish I would have had a virtual coach, and had it as a teacher when I look back, because that is, just like I said, in real estate, I sought it out. I knew it was important. In business, I know, people who have been in business years, they get those life coaches, those personal coaches, those virtual coaches, and they meet with them weekly. And they'll tell you, I've listened to their blogs, and they'll tell you that was the turnaround. They felt like, okay, what am I going to do now? Many people get out of a profession because they don't feel like they're growing, and they want to feel that, and so teacher retention is a big thing. We lose teachers, a lot of them, costs a lot of money. We invest in teachers. We invest a lot of money in teachers. probably over the 30 years I was a teacher, administrator, coach, I can't even tell you how much money was invested in me. For me to have gotten out of the profession after 20 years because I didn't feel like I was growing in it, would have been a loss of money. I'd say money, but a loss because of the investment made. And right now, teacher retention's big. Keeping teachers, and so having them feel good about growth, that's a big thing. And I think that comes back to the climate of the school and the expectations, of the district. So
right. I think that's great, Amy, that you focused on the culture of the school. And if the culture of the school is a culture of continuous improvement, and as you said, there's lots of ways to continuously improve. Some of them aren't as effective as others. I can remember. So I teach a class at a local university, and I gave my students teach a little mini lesson during a class time, and their peers watch them, and it's a great opportunity for them. And I gave them the option. I don't know why, but I gave them the option one semester of saying, I can either film your mini lesson using the SIBME platform and provide you timestamp feedback, or I can do it the old-fashioned way, actually the way that that was done for me when I was a student teacher, and that is I can use a paper and pencil, and I can jot down using a rubric or using some guiding questions. I can jot down feedback for you. So which would you prefer? And it was about half and half. And half the kids said, go ahead and film me. I'd like to have the film. I'd like to be self-reflective. And the other half said, no, I don't want the video. Just scribe. And Amy, I was 30 seconds into the first lesson being taught where I was scribing when I realized that I will never give this choice again. And I was stuck that semester for about half of my students providing what I believe was a subpar experience to the experience that my students had who were using video. So it took me just literally 30 seconds to realize this is horrible. This is not nearly as effective as the feedback that my students who are being videotaped are going to get, the experience for them to be able to be self-reflective with that video, and for me to provide timestamp feedback for their growth versus me jotting down a few comments as quickly as I can and handing them that sheet of paper. Dynamic versus static. And so that comes back to that idea that you mentioned. It's all about the culture of a school. And I do believe that, and I've been in lots of schools where continuous improvement, we're going to grow. You, by the way, are one of the most, you are thirsty for growth. That's in your personal life. That's in your professional life. That's what I know to be true about you. It doesn't surprise me that you sought out a real estate coach at all and were willing to pay, I am sure, a lot of money for that to happen because you want to be the best. That shines through every aspect of you. You are all about continuous improvement. I've been in lots of schools, some schools where that attitude of, I'm all that. I don't need to get better. This PLC stuff, what a waste of time. I don't need a coach. I've been teaching for 7 years. I'm good enough. And I think that notion of good enough those two words are scary for me. So I believe that what you said, that we're going to grow. We're going to have a culture of continuous improvement. And I believe in choice too, when the choices are have equal outcomes. So maybe I do have a PLC that's doing a book study, and then they're using those different strategies and they're getting into classrooms. Maybe we are doing those look-fors. There's lots of ways of doing it, but I really have to say that time is a precious resource in schools, and we have to start spending our time in ways that really show impact student achievement. It's all about student achievement. Is what I'm doing in my PLC going to impact student achievement? And so I love the notion of culture and continuous improvement. And I want us to get really smarter in schools about making sure that even if we are a culture of continuous improvement, that we're focusing on those things that really do impact student achievement. That's why the goals we ask administrators to select as handoff goals for us when we're working with our coachees, those goals have to be related to student achievement. If I'm working with a coachee on this goal and they nail it, that better have an impact on student achievement, or that was not a goal worth having.
Exactly.
So as we wrap things up, Amy, and TJ, if there's no more questions, we're going to just go ahead and wrap things up, is to say to those who are with us today and those who will watch this after the fact, is virtual coaching right for your school or for your district? If you're a school that doesn't have instructional coaches, or a district that does not have instructional coaches, and there are plenty of those in private schools, there are plenty of those in rural areas, is virtual coaching something that's right for you? And it's my belief that sending, and I've seen this happen in schools we're working with, sending 1 or 2 coaches through a virtual coaching cycle doesn't just impact their proficiency and their level of expertise and their level of confidence, but they take those strategies back to their colleagues and to their peers, and it can impact an entire school, not just that one particular person who's being coached. I would encourage you to contact us at SIBME if you have any interest in having a deeper conversation about whether or not virtual coaching would be right for your school or for your district or for your situation. And so we're giving you both a phone number that you can call and an email address that you can send your questions to. We'll be very responsive to it. And it's time. The time is now. This couldn't be a better timed webinar. The time is now to begin thinking about budgeting for next school year and setting aside some funds. If you don't have instructional coaches in your district or your building, or those instructional coaches really aren't being used for coaching, and Amy and I both know what that's like. Those instructional coaches tend to be folks, pardon me, who are great at everything they do. And we begin using them in multiple ways, some of which the least often may be actually coaching teachers. So please feel free to contact us if this is something you want to learn more about. We'd love to talk with you. We'd love to chat with you. We want to thank Amy for spending time with us today, talking with us about virtual coaching. She's one of our most, I think, enthusiastic coaches and one of our best experienced coaches. So thank you for the difference you're making, Amy. I like to say in virtual coaching, we are changing our profession one teacher at a time, and you have been an integral part of that for our virtual coaching services this year. And I want to thank you for the efforts you've made in doing that and the time you've taken to be with us on our webinar today.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. TJ, anything from you?
Not from me, but I just had to elevate the voice of Stephanie, who wrote into the chat. I just had to join in and say that I love that you brought this up. Many teachers feel that coaching is reserved for teachers who need support. But as teachers, we are lifelong learners, and we must collaborate together to keep moving forward. Once we shift this idea of what coaching is, we can shift the response.
Absolutely.
Just a fantastic quote. I just had to.
Excellent.
Very, very nice. Thank you all for participating in our webinar today. We look forward to hearing you. If you think that you have any interest in learning more about our virtual coaching services, y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.